A very warm welcome to the Hellenic Centre. I'm Iwona Blazwick, the director of the Hellenic Centre, and it's just such a great pleasure to see you all here tonight. And of course, even greatest pleasure to be hosting tonight's event with one of a series of Echo, with the work, presenting the work of Dorothy Cross, one of Ireland's most celebrated artists, and curator Iwona Blazwick, who not only brings her curatorial brilliance in this series, but has also conceived Echo, our inspiring talk series here at the Hellenic Centre. So a little bit about Echo. Echo focuses on the theme of contemporary artists and the ancient world, and it's captivating exploration of how leading artists in a way relate to ritual, myth, the legacy of antiquity, its conflicts and troubles as well. After the talk, there will be time for your questions, and that will follow, the Q&A will be followed by a drinks reception upstairs at the bar. Dorothy's very beautiful project, Kinship, which has been published into a book, is on sale upstairs. And if you were to know a little bit about what the book contains, it's the captivating story of the rediscovery in Ireland of an Egyptian sarcophagus in the 1920s with a man inside. And the story in the whole project, Dorothy's project, is that incredible journey of returning it to Egypt. So I really encourage you to browse the book upstairs, and I'm sure Iwona and Dorothy will mention it in your talk tonight. A little bit about Dorothy Cross, for the ones of you who don't know. Dorothy is acclaimed for her poetic explorations of memory, identity, and the natural world. Working in sculpture, photography, film, and installation, she transforms a great variety of materials into works that intertwine personal history with cultural and ecological themes, revealing what lies hidden or forgotten. Dorothy has exhibited internationally, including at Tate, St. Ives, Turner Contemporary, the Venice Biennale, and motif. Some major works include Ghost Ship in 1999 and Virgin Shroud in 1993. She lives and works in Ireland and is represented by curated Gallery in Dublin and Frith Street Gallery in London. Moderating the discussion is Iwona Blazwick, a distinguished British art critic, curator and lecturer. She is currently curator of the Royal Commission for Alumnus Public Art Expert Panel and was director of the Whitechapel Gallery from 2001 until 2022, where she spearheaded a major expansion of the organization's building and program. In 2008, she was awarded an OBE for services to art. I would like to thank Frith Street Gallery at this point for partnering with us and supporting tonight's reception, and especially Ellen Kitea and Ali McGill for working with us so closely for the realization of tonight's event. Last but not least, my biggest thanks go to Dorothy Cross for accepting our invitation for tonight's talk, and to Iwona for masterminding Echo and for moderating tonight's discussion. So please join me in a very warm round of applause for our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naya. It's wonderful to be here and so wonderful to see you all joining us for this conversation. Dorothy, you live and work in Connemara in County Galway, which is on the west coast of Ireland, and it's described by Oscar Wilde as a place of savage beauty. But it's also a place of many histories, political, cultural, geological, and oceanographic. Are these different kind of sedimentations of history important for your work?
They probably are, and they're probably kind of like conglomerates, you know, they all bundle together, so I don't really go out into the landscape to identify any one necessarily, but they confront you all the time. And it's also a lost area. When Ireland was invaded and the Pale was constructed around Dublin, the fertile city, people would say to hell or connacht. So people were pushed to the west of Ireland, where I now live. So it is a boggy, not very wealthy territory, which is very beautiful. That's kept it safe in a way.
And it has mountain ranges, bogland, incredible coast. So it just seems to have everything in a way. But also, right over the Atlantic is the passageway to America. And of course, it's been a place of great emigration and colonisation. So it's got lots of these kind of political histories within, traces of which are in that landscape.
Yes, the bones of history. And where I live, the land I bought, 5 acres by the ocean, has a famine cottage on it. That's a ruin, so, I confront that every day. And the population reduced from 8 million to 3 after the potato famine. We've got a number of themes that we're pursuing in this talk. The first one is called Conversations with Antiquity. And you'll see why we came up with this idea, because of this image here. And it's a work, it was an exhibition called Gravity, and it's at the Crawford Art Gallery in Cork, where you suspended the skeleton of a whale amongst this very interesting collection of statues. So, in a way, you kind of tap into the history of Western sculpture. Some of these original, some of them are plaster casts, going right back to the Greeks. See? You see what I did there? The relation to the Hellenic. Why did you want to bring an animal into relation with these statues, which are primarily of human beings? Well, I think as we continue the conversation, is this working? Whoops. Okay, sorry, I think I pushed the button. In some ways, it's about, as we continue speaking, you really see how the relationship between our human bodies and animal bodies is terribly important to me. And respect, this piece is very much about lack of respect. This beautiful Cuvier's whale I found on the beach, a local farmer brought it up on his tractor to my field. It took 4 years to rot. The birds didn't eat it. In the end, it was maggots. Then I brushed down the bones and hung it here over a little rusty bucket. So you have this really demeaning awfulness of the catch, in a way, of this beautiful whale. It's a deep water whale. And then put it on a plinth surrounded by these classical sculptures. And the colour of the bone was terribly like the colour of Carrara marble. So he fitted in there beautifully, in a very tragic way.
But it's also because the history of statue is about heroes, kings, people, gods that we want to literally put on a pedestal. Was it a way of, paying respect to that?
Yes. Because just the scale of the skeleton is so magnificent, but brutal. There was his vertebrae were broken halfway down from the way he rolled on the beach. So there was something very tragic about it.
I suppose also kind of connected through calcium.
Yes.
The idea about bone and stone. And in another work, we see a different idea of history, which is this incredible stalactite, which is formed, as you all know, over millennia through dripping water. And, it's that calcite deposit that creates this amazing thing. Where did you find this?
Well, there's a famous cave in Doolin in the west of Ireland in County Clare, where there are many, many stalactites. And I was thinking of trying to actually construct a stalactite, a real one, in a cathedral for a project which never happened. And sometimes those ones that never happen lead you to more beautiful things. So I discovered this is the second largest singular stalactite in the world, apparently. It's in a cave in County Clare, and there's only one in the cave. So you go in and it's like going to the Taj Mahal of stalactites. And it's 7 meters long. And I had accidentally come across a boy soprano in a choir surrounded by big hairy men singing with his beautiful pre-breaking voice. And I got his mother to agree to allow me to have him stand under a stalactite. and sing music notes that didn't reference any written music.
And we have a film of that now. Why did you want to juxtapose that? So you've got something which is incredibly hard and resilient, and you have the delicacy of this young boy's voice, which will break. What was your...
It was about time, really. It was about the brevity of our human existence and the ancientness of this thing that's still growing, still dripping. And his voice did break several weeks after we recorded him. So it is about that vulnerability in a way. It was almost like a baby bird learning how to sing. And there were, as you heard, there were incredibly sharp notes. He went higher and higher and higher. We were terrified he'd crack the stalactite would come tumbling down on his head.
What's also interesting and beautiful about the stalactite is it looks like drapery. It looks like classical drapery. And it's apparent softness, and it comes from something fluid and becomes something utterly hard as marble. So it's like a natural sculpture.
You can hear the drips too, which is kind of beautiful.
Our next theme is metamorphosis, and there's a still here from another film that you made on a journey to the Galapagos Islands with your friend, the actress Fiona Shaw. And we see here, we'll go back to it, but we see here a still where she's reading tales from Ovid. And it's this 8th century Roman poet's concept of metamorphosis that takes us into this next body of works. And in a way, it's something which has been a theme throughout the history of art. And I wondered if you could say something about the idea of metamorphosis, of creating fusions and hybrids in your work.
Isn't it more about, it's funny when I'm asked to directly talk about these things in relationship to my work, I suddenly go, blah, 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 blah. It's about our own, it's about a collision that I'm not going to answer your question, I think, but it's about some kind of collision that creates something new. So that is a metamorphosis, but it's not identifiable in a way, so it's always moving, because there's no certainty in it except some kind of surprise. Is that answering your question?
Yeah.
But I know when it occurs in the studio or wherever else, the excitement makes you understand that there's something special there.
You came to kind of public prominence in the 1990s with a series of works which took cow udders as their material, and we have here a beautiful example of work called Amazon, where there is a single breast. Could you tell us about the genesis of this?
I saw a sieve in Norway made out of cow's udder, and I was just so fantastically delighted because it was like Mary Oppenheim met a functional object. So I came back to Ireland and sourced cow's udders, and it was before European rules, so I got a man to get them for me at an abattoir. Very awful procedure. But then I would mould them over forms, and in this particular case, the cow's udder only had one teat, the other three had been torn off, and I was disgusted, but it led me inadvertently to create this singular breasted tailor's dummy, which I named Amazon. And in those days I was really keen, I think because of my Irish legacy, of titles helping through some kind of discovery. So the Amazonians, as you all probably know, were famous mythological warriors who chopped one breast off so that they could shoot their bows and arrows more accurately. And this particular one had a very, very big breast, and her teat was very much like the head of the penis. And that series was all about that confusion and slight flustering response that I got. Some of them were more peculiar than others. Even myself in the studio, I found some of them quite terrifying. I put one inside the gusset of a pair of knickers, invertedly, like some weird sex thing, and put it in a trunk in the corner of the gallery because I think I was so kind of afraid of it. And that piece has disappeared too. This piece got lost in transit. So I don't know whether somebody robbed them or whether they just disappeared.
That's so tragic that this incredible work is no longer with us. But also, I suppose, the idea of the Amazon and feminism and the in the 90s still, I think, we were all part of that movement of trying to find a way to make female artists, for example, have some prominence within the art world. I mean, it was still quite tough.
It was, and what was so interesting is when the teat, which is the milk-giving thing, obviously, which is vulnerable and powerful, becomes dried, it goes very, very hard. So it was fantastic around that whole thing of gender and identifying one's own. And a woman ran up to me on the street one day and said, "Have you not considered women who'd had mastectomies?" And I always used my mother. I said, well, my mother had, and she doesn't mind looking at this cow. And in the end of the day, it's a cow. But it was, it's probably got, today this would hold water, so to speak, in terms of that kind of confusion. It was more about confusion.
And this very beautiful work, which does make me think of Merit Oppenheim. I mean, it's got this fantastic cerulean quality to it. And Cinderella and the shoes, Dorothy's shoes in The Wizard of Oz. I mean, it does have all of these associations with something magical and alchemical. But actually, it also has a strong feminist meaning.
It really, I lived in San Francisco for a long time, and bound feet were only, as far as I know, criminalised in the 70s. And I live near Chinatown, and you would see old ladies kind of teetering along on their little pointy feet because they break the toes to make them into these sex toys. So as I was working on these, then these things would make themselves, they would kind of, I wouldn't intentionally do it because of bound feet, but it had all these overlays. And they worked very well on the stilettos.
Yeah, and the stiletto shoe as well, of course. We forget how much women's bodies are regulated and bound. And it's about pushing your breast forward and your butt backwards, and also not being able to run, I always think. And being slightly in pain all the time. No. But they're also very erotic images, I think. And I think that idea of eros is also very much part of the work, the texture of that cowhide. It's so tactile and smooth, and you want to touch it. Here's a piece which takes a symbol, and digits and fingers are very important in the work. What is that thing that's growing out?
It's a walrus whisker. I had a friend who used to go to the Arctic, and he said, "Would you like me to bring something back?" And I knew he ate walruses, so I asked him for a whisker. And this is a thimble belonging to my grandmother, so it's very simply about the desensitization of the thimble and the extra sensitivity of a walrus's whisker, which finds prey. And that's a perfect kind of just collision of territories.
Mhm.
Simple, very simple.
I suppose today we could interpret these hybrid creatures as a political statement about the environment. You know, we've seen so much thinking, philosophy, science, art about our relation with non-human species, and also about the need for the human to remember that we are in fact animals and part of the continuity of nature, but they could also be about magical transformation and alchemy as a form of magic and of myth-making, and of course surrealism. But the other element of this work, I think, is kind of existential, and I was reminded of this fragment of a poem by T.S. Eliot, The Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, where he says, "I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas." So is the shell something to do with the self?
Well, it's like a flip, isn't it? It's like our structure is on the outside. And they do lose their skins. And I was saying to Iwona this morning, Bruce Chapman, in one of his books, said that the Tierra del Fuego in Indian's word for depression translated into the crab without its shell. So there is this vulnerability that we're opposite to the crab, but the crab goes through that process. And I use crabs actually quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. And again, the digit finger.
The digit, yeah. But here they're fine. They're fine together. The finger and the claw. They work together. It's not some kind of competition.
Mm-hmm. In this next work, you yourself merge fully with the image of an animal. This is called overlap. Is this a kind of image of liberation?
Yes, in a way, it is about desire, but it's also about some kind of predicament because it's of the impossibility, because it's never going to happen. And my desire, I scuba dive, or I have done for years, and it's the closest thing you can get to flight, but it's also at times you can encounter animals in a way that is a real kind of, it's almost like it's a gift, but it's still an impossibility because we don't have gills, sadly. I used to love The Man from Atlantis, that program on television, because he could swim underwater with no gear.
But I think there's also in this image the feeling of exhilaration that we see when we encounter the wilderness, exhilaration and an intimation of the sublime, of this other parallel life of pure movement and fluidity. And, I find that very kind of compelling because you look also as if you're dancing. And I think the two together is very powerful. There is a goddess in Greek mythology who's both a monster and a protector. And she is Medusa. She's a gorgon who had apparently a head of writhing snakes and who turns anyone who looks at her to stone. She was beheaded by Perseus, who uses her deathly gaze on his own shield to protect him in battle. The Medusa is also a zoological term for the jellyfish, and that leads us to this extraordinary film and work where you yourself swim with jellyfish, something that I think most of us would be terrified to do. Tell us about the origin of this work.
The origin is quite a long story, but to make it brief, I heard about a woman who lived on an island in County Kerry called Mortallap, and in the early 1900s she bred jellyfish in captivity in bell jars in her father's house. And I started researching her, and then together with my brother, who's a zoologist, we got funded by SciArt and the Wellcome Trust and went to Australia to make a film called Medusa. And on the way I wanted to get footage of jellyfish, and I knew there were islands in Palau and Micronesia full of jellyfish where they actually are photosynthesized, they move across these lakes following the sun. So I went there to get footage, and I noticed what the animals were doing around my friend's head, and because I had long hair I asked him to film them around me, And what happened was, it was almost like this curiosity. And they don't have brains, they have nerve nets, these don't sting, so it was not any pain at all. And they kind of tickled. And it was almost like this symbiotic thing going on as they swam around the hair.
And I think you bring back their beauty, and also they were curious about you. And usually we're busy avoiding them, or thinking of them as a kind of lifeless blob, but in fact, there is a different kind of sentience, I suppose.
Yes, and the ones we were filming in Australia are the most poisonous animals on the world. They're box jellyfish. So it was quite different here.
And again, I think that's what this is doing, is perhaps reminding us of nature at its... it can be dangerous. We can't simply anthropomorphise it. It can be cute. We think that it's cute and fluffy, but actually it can be as powerful as we are, but probably not as brutal, I think, as we are. This is an installation from a film screening that you made. What is this space?
It's a church in Shrewsbury in England where it was made for the bicentenary of Charles Darwin, and it's where Darwin used to sit his little bottom when up to the age of 7. He used to go there with his mother for services. And I made a film. Shani asked about 10 artists to go to Galapagos to see how we'd respond to being artists in a place like the Galapagos. We all came back totally depressed because we realised that nature was much more powerful than we are, and there was very little you could do. So my friend Fiona Shaw at the time wasn't working, so she came with me, and we lived in the Darwin Research Centre for 2 weeks in a little kind of a hut, and I made this little film called Stage, and a lot of it is me speaking to Fiona, who's so brilliant, and her response to the notion of art in a place like the Galapagos. And we screened it in the church, and about 3 people saw it.
Upon myself to banish had I art, impregnable my fortress, unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be? Except by abdication. Me. Of we.
That's a poem, by Emily Dickinson. And I think it does take us to the heart of your work in the sense that it is about the nature of being, and of it's an existential questioning. And she says, doesn't she? She talks about abdicating yourself.
Yeah, it's about abdication in the ego too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Me from myself to banish
monarchs.
art.
Yeah.
So it's about being humble, I suppose, and also how you
And stepping back.
Yeah.
And I think all of us involved in that project kind of stepped back because of the impossibility.
And this is a photograph of Fiona Shaw, and this is what it's called a bone room.
I called it bone room because we were snooping around the Darwin Research. In the beginning, they were very excited we were there, and then they got quite bored quite quickly. And we'd just snoop around and go to Lonesome George's, and the last Galapagos tortoise of his species, who was still alive when we were there. And I peeked through a door, and it was full of these bones, and it was like this incredibly beautiful arena. And we got permission to go in there to film and take photographs. So I used Fiona for a model amongst the bones.
our next group of works are all about taking epic journeys. And this is something which goes back, obviously, to epic poetry, to ideas about pilgrimage. I think we all think about taking important journeys in our lives and so on. So the first of this, I see it in a way as a kind of trilogy, is called Ghost Ship. And it has this luminous glow. Why is that?
It was for a public project in Dublin Bay where to create something that wouldn't exist forever. And when we were kids, my father used to bring me out to these lightships that marked underwater reefs near our house. And they were decommissioned. And now they've been replaced by satellite buoys. So they represent something very kind of, in my mind, romantic and beautiful and lost. And I got permission to use one and paint it with phosphorus paint and try and create a ghost. So it was very simple, and it was very popular. It was the first time I ever in my life made anything that was popular. And it was in Dublin Bay for 3 weeks in 1999. And actually, I love the word pilgrimage in relationship to art. It's something I haven't thought about, but we make pilgrimages when we want to go and view art, but also when you're part of a pilgrimage yourself, when you're trying to make it. It is something that is so kind of nurturing. Now this was one, I've done quite a few outside projects that are nightmares. Even returning the Egyptian body, you run into such bureaucracy. This one took 4 years, it was shelved, and in the end, it worked so well. We had to make a superstructure of lights to boost the phosphorus because we didn't live in the tropics. So it had to be boosted. So you had this kind of skeleton of lights that every 15 minutes illuminated the phosphorus, which is a bit of a shame. If it was in the tropics, it would have lit perfectly.
And you write about this work that it's also about, and there used to be floating lighthouses. And your work is always, in some ways, about coastlines and the sea and water and so on. So is it also about a kind of lost way of life, would you say?
Yes. Yeah, I really, people talk about risk and health and safety and everything like that, it's so important, risk and health and lack of health and safety. I hate health and safety. It just limits us. We're going to die anyway, so just, let us off.
So many years later, you made this work called Heartship, and it is carrying a very strange cargo, which we have an image of here. Could you tell us about this odd organic thing?
This took 4 years to borrow a heart. After Ghost Ship, a friend of mine asked me would I do a project on a battleship, and I immediately came up with the idea of putting a human heart on it, because I had heard that this Irish naval vessel had been in the Mediterranean and actually had saved 18,000 migrants from drowning as they were trying to cross to Europe. And it was the same ship. But to find a heart is incredibly difficult. And I tried to get, heart surgeons to give me the one that had been chopped out, and normally they'd throw them away or burn them or something. But this one was found in Cork City, where I come from, where the ship was harboured in 1863 in a crypt wrapped in lead, and again the gender unknown, which was kind of beautiful. And it was in Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. So I eventually, after the 4 years, we offered to pay to borrow it for a day. And it came to Cork. We put it on the ship. It had to be a truth. It was very interesting at the time, that thing of truth, because people said, sure, you just say there's a heart on the ship, or put a pig's heart on the ship. It had to be a heart. That's something with my work that I'm very keen on truth, but the poetry of the fact that it had been found in the city. And there was a little campaign by locals saying they were going to rob it and bring it back to Cork, but it had to go back to Oxford. We only got permission to come up the river for one afternoon. I had a beautiful singer called Lisa Hannigan wander around on the deck, and we had pre-recorded songs. She's got a song called Prayer for the Dying, and the refrain is, my heart, your heart. And as it came up the river, it was like a jukebox of pumping out music made from a waterphone and a glass harmonica. And then she sang live on deck when they docked. This is the recorded version. Sadly, nobody documented it, but the crew were incredible. They were like a kind of Pina Bausch choreography. Because it's quite hard to dock like that, and they were afraid they'd have to do it again, but they did it meticulously. And then they all disappeared, and she was dressed in grey, and she just wandered around singing. It was absolutely beautiful.
That's extraordinary work. The third, perhaps, in that is... another kind of voyage. In a way, it's the counterpoint to the Odyssey or the pilgrimage, which is coming home, which is, and for many people who can't ever come home. So there is obviously a very, very powerful contemporary meaning to that right now in our world. But this is a project which, again, was many years in the making, and sending someone home, it's a work called Kinship. So could you tell us about who this body is? Who is this person?
Well, we don't know his name, but my aunt told me in my 20s about the existence of a mummified body in the university in Cork, where I come from. And the day after the heart came up the river, I remembered. So I said, let's try and bring that body back to Egypt, thinking, boop, we put him on a ship, we bring him back to Cairo, down through the Straits of Gibraltar. And it didn't work like that. It took 5 years to organise it. But there's so many mad, spooky, kind of fabulous stories around it. The book that is here tells a story, basically, but also some fabulous writers have written about the notion of displacement and death. But it turned out that the sarcophagus was in Cork that didn't belong to this man. It came from a higher-ranking man called Har, whose family, a lot of them are in Turin in the Museum of Egyptology. So our man was unnamed and unknown, and he was lower-ranking. He was not at all valuable. So we went to Egypt, offering him back to the Egyptians, who first said, we don't want your mummy, we've got loads of them. And then I told him the story of my aunt, and my uncle had been accused of hiding it in the anatomy department because he was a professor. And then the weirdest thing is, I thought he was in Dublin, the body. And I went to a local restoration expert to ask how much it might cost to restore a mummy. And I said, he's in Dublin, I'm going to visit him next week. And he said, no, he isn't. He's in a crate above your head in storage. So this man's body was 5 minutes from my house for 12 years, and I never knew. So all these kind of layers of weird energy made us more and more determined to bring him home. We probably should have robbed him in the beginning and just put him in our own boat, but we didn't. We went the official way.
And what happened then? So you found him.
We found him, and the university wanted him sent back to the university in Cork, so we hired a hearse. And we drove him through the wilds of Connemara in this beautiful black shiny hearse for the 4 hours drive down to Cork, where he came from, or where he was originally arrived. And there are many, many stories about how he got there. The official one is that an African missionary priest got it legally in those days in Egypt. They were being sold all around the world, and he was given as a gift to the university. My aunt her daughter is still alive, she's 91. She's determined it was on a British Navy boat that had got attacked by the IRA, it's a true story, the Ottenmar ship at Churchill was furious apparently, and all this military stuff was stolen, all these weapons, and that he was amongst them. But there's no way of proving it. She tried to find out what had been on board that ship, but she couldn't find out. So she loves that story. I kind of, in a way, don't care how he got there. I was much more interested in how he got back home.
And he did get back home.
He did get back home.
By playing?
By playing Egypt Air. And the university made our life so difficult. I'll tell this story, even I hope it doesn't go too long. The crates were so big they wouldn't fit in the regular Egypt Air flight to Cairo. Like, everything that could have happened, and you're just going, oh, Jesus, what next? So President Sisi actually came to visit Ireland and Norway on a kind of unofficial visit last year when there was a bit of trouble, when Assad had just left Syria, and there was a bit of trouble, and apparently he was just kind of told to leave and just do a few visits to a few different countries. And he came to Dublin and met the Egyptian ambassador, who was kind of on our side, and he was told the plane wasn't big enough. So the next month we got a big plane, and our body went in the crate into the side of this giant plane and went home. Yeah.
Amazing. Why did you call it kinship?
Well, maybe it was a bit silly. After Ghost Ship, Heart Ship, I wanted another notion of ship, and we went through many, many versions, and it is about some relationship, kind of universal relationship, universal kinship, but it's also a bit overused, so I dropped in the home as well, because it's quite tricky. We should have had a competition to find the best ship word, but mothership would have excluded fathership. Worship was something that was beautiful, but then you're close to warship. It was we spent months.
I actually think it's brilliant, because also it's about lineage, dynasty, and also, as you say, relationship. Now you say it, there's a lot of ships at sea with different semantic meanings, and here's the hearse.
That's the hearse, and we stopped for tea in a village on the way to Cork, and everybody said, "Who's dead?" Who's dead? We said, "Oh, our uncle." Make it simple.
A few more journeys here. So this is underneath in the Antarctic.
Yeah, this was I went with an underwater camera to film under the icebergs in Antarctica, and came home with this not very good bluey footage, not as good as Discovery Channel, and it sat there for about 3 years, and then one day with the editor we flipped it into black and white negative, and suddenly it just became so perfect. The divers started glowing like angels, and the toxicity of the flip of black and white for the ice just made it very perilous and dangerous. So it reads very much in a way that is about the dread of the melting, I felt. Mm-hmm. So it's just a kind of, it's very, again, one of those, it's like the thimble, very quick,
Mm-hmm. And you yourself swam.
Yeah.
That's astonishing. How did you not freeze to death?
Well, you wear a dry suit with a thing called a woolly bear, and actually what happens is that the fresh water freezes somebody will contradict me here now, my memory, minus 1.7, I think. And what happens when you're coming up, you could only dive for about half an hour, and your face goes numb immediately, and the rest of you is quite cosy. But what happens is that your breath is fresh water, and so your breath starts freezing. And the ice built up on my regulator, and I did a thing called a free flow, where your regulator starts bubbling. And luckily I had a buddy, and I came up with a buddy. But it was safe enough, we weren't that deep, But it was extraordinary. It felt like the incredible shrinking man. It was like going into a cocktail glass or something. And all the icebergs are different ages and different colours, so it's hallucinogenic. It's just amazing, and there's very little life. We were down there in Antarctic summer, so it was bright. You see very little. You might hear a whale in the distance and see an odd penguin flying past, but there's very little other life.
And it's disappearing.
Yeah, it's disappearing.
So this is a document, a record of something that will not be with us in a couple of generations.
That's right, yeah.
We're going to hotter climes now with the Pacific, and this is a journey that you made to Tahiti, and it's tied up with the notion of pearls, which again is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? Which is about grit and this process that oysters go through. Tell us more.
Yeah, and it was for a show. Where's that place that values money in London where they have a gallery? I've forgotten its name. Bloomberg.
Yes.
Sacha Craddock commissioned some of us artists, and because Bloomberg, they all sit there and they talk about the value of the yen and the pound and everything. And you're surrounded by these offices where people are doing this all day long. It's extraordinary. So in the 15th century, the pearl was considered the most valuable thing on the planet. So I thought, let's do something about that. And my Aunt May, the same woman who told me about this is all about circles, about the mummy, she was a pathologist, and I had hand bones that she had for educational purposes, before they had plastic models. So I decided to bring the fingertips of a human hand to Tahiti, put them into black-lipped oysters. They didn't have to be black-lipped, but it turned out these were people who agreed to do it with me. And then they put the oysters out in the lagoon and left them there for several months to see if the animal would cover them with the scab, which is called nacre, which is the beautiful pearl. But also this was very much about beauty and fear, and that whole removal from our own structure, our own skeleton, and embedding it within pearl, which we all think is the most beautiful thing. So what happened was the farmers put in beads in cultured pearls to create pearls, and then it's like an irritant in the animal's body, and the animal covers it with this smooth, beautiful pearl nacre to stop the irritation, which I was saying to Iwona earlier. It's almost like when you're making art, this kind of thing that persists, and then hopefully you end up with the pearl. So you can see them there. They sit there all day long. They have Walkmen on, and they pop out a pearl, and they choose the good ones. They have different selection boxes of pearls, and then they put in the little fingertips. And I went back to Ireland and waited, and I got a little envelope several months later, and only one of the fingertips had been covered, and the other 4 had been lost. And this is where the accident was perfect, because if there had been 5 of them, they would have been like nail varnish, really. And when it's only the index finger too, which is so perfect in terms of direction, history of art, la-di-da-di-da.
The final section of our talk is called Earth Matters, and here we're looking at your relationship with geology. And here is an astonishing natural swimming pool. Weirdly, in Irish it translates as wormhole, and that's you swimming.
That's me, because it's hard to get anyone else to do these things. But it's a natural pool, and it's about 30 feet long and 10 feet wide, and it was about scale, really, just lying in the middle. But it's also one of the wonders of the world. From the first moment I've seen, it's in the back of the Aran Islands, if any of you are ever going to Ireland, which are 3 islands off Galway that are limestone. So it's a geological rift where it collapses, because it's pervious stone, so the water goes into these layers, and then it erodes, and the whole thing had collapsed perfectly into this shape. And when you swim in it, the ocean is out on this end, and it surges in and out, it's tidal. And you can only get in, obviously, when it's very calm. And it's nearly my favourite place in the world. I adore it. Unfortunately, the Red Bull divers went there a few years ago and built a ramp on the cliff, and had their thingy-lingy divers going in, and it's now become a bit popular.
That's too bad. We're going actually back to that stalactite, but here it's been transformed into a most remarkable sculpture, where before we had these calcite deposits, you've transformed this into a series of hands. It's cast in bronze with a very remarkable patina about it. What made you decide to turn that geological formation into something which is to do with gesture and the human?
And it's almost the opposite to all the art historical references, because it's not pointing towards the heavens. I called it earth, so it was more like, maybe it's about that struggle between the two, and this kind of accumulation, almost like Rodin's Gates of Hell or whatever, you know, that they're all pointing towards this need to remain in a way.
Mm-hmm. Because perhaps, you know, thinking about the trajectory of the modern, of the Enlightenment, of modernism, it's always up, and it's always away. And I was reading recently that there was more money spent on researching space travel, like by you know, a multiple of thousands, than there is research in soil, in the earth. And without that layer of soil around our planet, we will all perish. And it's really interesting that sense of always going up, out, away to some future. I mean, even now, people like Musk are thinking about colonising the moon or colonising Mars. And what we ignore is what's under our feet. So I think this is a very, very extraordinary work, visually so beautiful, but also politically so important. And I think also that this idea about returning to the earth, and there's a series called Everest Erratic, where you kind of return the stone that we are constantly quarrying and extracting and ripping out of mountains, and you return them to being a mountain again.
Yeah, and it's kind of Lilliputian, so it's about some kind of extraterrestrial viewpoint. And this, I did actually get a file so that the Mount Everest was this one was called Everest Floor, so it just emerges out of these paving stones. And we did have to get a CNC rendition of the mountain, so it's absolutely accurate. And then I moved on to one called Everest Erratic, which an erratic being a geological term for a lump of rock that's moved from one territory to another through glaciation in the Ice Age and dropped. And I have one at the end of my land actually that's incredibly beautiful. So this was, I've worked there for about 10 years in this extraordinary studio in Carrara. And the backyard is full of blocks of stone that have been used for other projects. So I don't go to the quarry and get them cut out. So I reuse them or recycle them in a funny way. And so I found a big lump of Carrara marble, and we carved a perfect Everest on top and called it Everest Erratic. And this you can see the surrounding studios. It's an incredibly beautiful place.
And what's interesting is that you're returning culture with all that statuary back to nature. That you're almost reversing the process of the carvings, you know, the whole history of art, you know, back to antiquity, and then you're taking it back to the natural form. This is the final body work that we're going to talk about, and I saw this show last year at the Hellenic Centre in Dublin and was completely blown away by it. And it's a series of marbles from different parts of the world, all different colours, different veins, different textures. And what you will see is that out of each one, Dorothy has carved these extraordinary, beautiful, exquisite renderings of feet. So again, rather than this idea about the bust, the head always looking up, no, this is going to the thing that connects us to the earth. Can you tell us about the marble and the genesis of this work?
This, again, was kind of due to the fact that I'd go out into the yard behind Francesca's studio and find these lumps of... It was like being in a candy store and asking her the names of the stones, and then you'd pour a glass of water on them and they'd shine out yellow or blue or pink. And I must add, though, that I don't carve them myself. I make the models in plaster, and they're carved by these fantastic guys that she employs. But one by one, one was called Sienna Gold, one was Brazilian Blue, one was Belgian Black, Portuguese Pink. So I decided to cut a foot on each of those coloured marbles from all around the world, to kind of talk about place, some kind of proof of place, fossilization, exposed fossil type thing, but also the residue of life, of that footstep, wherever that is, and just line them up.
So again, it's like a journey, like a pilgrimage,
Yes.
and maybe a kind of record of all the ghosts of passage that have traversed those stones. And this work, Red Erratic, which was supposed to be inside the Frith Street Gallery, right? But
Yes.
what happened?
Francesca Nicoli, who runs the studio, I found this pink lump of marble, and she said it was called Damascus Rose, and I thought, oh my God, how beautiful, how terribly sad. And I bought the block and decided to carve these feet on top that aren't about, kind of proud statuary. They're more about kind of clinging onto the surface of this block. And, that whole thing of Syria, the predicament of Syria, the road to Damascus, illumination, there was so many overlays of meaning that just fed into it. And also when you polish the stone, it's got these red veins running through it that are like blood. They're like slabs of meat, really. So I got terribly excited about it. And then we had a plan for a Frith Street show, which we called Damascus Rose. And I forgot to say that it weighed 7.5 tons. And it couldn't go into the gallery, which led to a whole other story. Because Jane fabulously allowed us to rent a flatbed truck and park it outside the gallery for the night. It wasn't allowed in. And then it was driven away and put in storage. Then we, Cornwall, Tramonier, Sculpture Park very kindly put it there for a year. Then it was pulled away and put into storage again. And then I was invited to do something in Folkestone for the triennial. And originally I wanted to put a heart in a submarine, but nobody would lend us a submarine. Even though I think I asked Richard Wentworth about your cousins. But so that didn't happen. But hopefully that'll happen another time. But so we brought it to Folkestone, and they were brilliant, actually. Circa Carey, the curator, got permission for us to put it on the lower level of the pier, which most of you might know in Folkestone, that kind of curves out. And what happened was, I thought the water would just trickle in every so often, but I actually have videos of it coming right over the top. So it's in this place, which is at that body of water where France meets England, where you have that collision of migrants trying to cross, and it's beautiful there. And I nearly cried when I saw the water splashing around it. And it might stay there. We're hoping it might stay there. And even if it got washed away, that would be. It's like chapters of a story, because it's living out this, unloved kind of life of exclusion everywhere it goes.
And if you can get to Folkestone, it's still there. And it's the most incredible experience of descending from the boardwalk down into these semi-subterranean spaces, and then the sea comes up. It's absolutely fantastic. The final image in our slideshow. Some of you may have visited Frieze Masters, and there was a focus on Dorothy's work and this extraordinary work where, rather than an image which suggests passage and journeys, it's more an image of devotion. This is a work called Kneel, and there's a nice close-up of it here. So why did you change from those moving feet that rise up to these feet which are about kneeling?
Well, these feet are directly reference the Dürer drawing of the kneeling feet. And, at the time, I think it is devotional. And what's wonderful about talking to Iwona over these few days is it exposes the work to me in a way. 'Cause I feel sometimes I get very lazy about my own work, and I'm a little bit parroty about it. So it's really fabulous disruption, and intelligent layers and veins coming into the work. So thank you for that. But so that notion of prayer, that is held within the earth, that is held within our own demise, whatever way we end up, and proof or lack of proof of our existence. And what happened with this, though, the feet I had imagined further down on the rock, and then it didn't work. They were disappearing in their position. So the guys flipped it in Italy, and you had this strange mixture between what we're seeing on our screens the whole time at the moment, of people being buried alive in Gaza, and this prayer position. And as a friend of mine said, it's like dead praying. And it's harder to look at than red erratic, because it's maybe in this day and age truer to the abominations that are occurring, you know.
This is our final work, and it's a chance now to hand over to you and ask if you have any questions or comments.
Or on the microphone?
Dorothy, I'm English, so I can't talk like you.
Does that mean you're not going to say anything, Richard?
No, I'm going to say what I'm going to. I'm going to try and say what I want to say. Did you just mention me in some way to do with a submarine?
Yeah, I think at one point when I was looking for submarine years ago, you had some cousin who was involved in the Navy.
No, I think that's Peter Logan's brother. But we can do that later. I think he ran a nuclear submarine.
They wouldn't give you one, Richard.
Anyway,
Yeah.
now I'm doing this here. First of all, I just want to say that it's fantastic that you mentioned you've mentioned lots of enablers, and I think our culture with a little c is really bad at doing that. And I think to hear Chinese being invoked is really fantastic. So if you don't know who Shani is, ask somebody later.
Yeah, she's great.
She was the great permissioner for about 15 years. Very unusual. There's something to do with a word which I never want to have to say, but verisimilitude. So you deal with verisimilitude a lot. And that then runs to that other word, make-believe. And we all live in make-believe because we're all fictions. And I'm really curious about your relationship to, so you have a very good sense of what used to be called the crafts. You know what a shoemaker does, and you probably even attempted it yourself. And you know what weaving is, and you know what extraction, what the difference between modelling and carving. Modernity. Which is exactly I booked that one. So now anyone can make anything look like anything remotely. There's masses of sculpture being produced that looks like. And for stupid humans, it's in a kind of strange space of make-believe, which you don't believe. And I sort of want to know how you negotiate that all the time, because I don't think, I would never describe you as crafty. I would, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Not the other kind of crafty. But you're very good at keeping away from what I would call the overtly digi.
The overtly digi. Yes, it doesn't interest me. So I guess that's the avoidance. Maybe I'm afraid of it. So, you could say, is it regressive to go to the skin or the stone? Is that making sense? It's about relationship with our own, if a robot of myself was sitting next to myself and you didn't know what the difference was, I still would, I don't know why I said that. You know what I mean? It's about blood and guts, Richard. It's about blood and guts. But it's also about spirit. And, we're we never speak about that, but I do believe there is a sense of energy that emanates from certain things, and from everything actually. And I think it can be harnessed in a way that is quite powerful at times. It's never like I remember working in music and opera and stuff, and trying to kind of accumulate, who's ever tried to write the music for the voice of God. And I remember getting on to a friend of mine and nobody really has. I once did an opera in a cave, it was a Pergolesi Stabat Mater. And before I read the translation, I thought, they were all, speaking to God and speaking about God. And it wasn't. It was about these pilgrims who are going to beat me, kill me. We have to aspire to your greatness and your godliness. And I suppose there is that awful gap in our lives where we cannot manifest, We can look at James Turrell's beautiful skies and think this is the closest thing to being able to purely look at a piece of sky. But then when his sky garden came to West Cork, the local farmers were saying, sure, aren't I looking at the sky all the time? But, I'm not clear about what I'm saying, but I think and maybe it's the flip of that stalactite of the hands. It's kind of like a building process, but there's always going to be that gap. Every so often you can try, music does it so beautifully, I think in some ways music does it more beautifully than anything, to bring you to a point of connection to the indescribable, the unmakeable, and I think it is kind of brick building, making art, but it has to pave a way of beauty and truth, actually. And that's the big hazard at the moment.
I'm sure people are looking forward to the reception, but we do have time for more questions. Yeah?
Looking forward to a drink.
Do you have any advice for working with bones, or any practices that you can put in place that you recommend?
Well, that's a good question, because it's quite tricky these days. I once found a human skull in a dumpster in Dublin. I was digging around, because I lived in California where people put stuff in dumpsters and you'd furnish your house with it. And I found a perfect skull box with marbled paper with little compartments. And because my aunt was a pathologist, I recognised it. Thought I would open it and find nothing. It was full of the skull. I think if you come across a bone like Auntie May's bone, I think there's something fine about that. There's some kind of license. But if you go online and where you want to buy a skull, it's absolutely gruesome. I don't know if you've ever done it. You just go, oh my God, this is somebody's auntie who was, murdered and thrown out in the back garden. That you just don't know. But I really feel like I have no idea what work I'm going to do next. But I never used anything to do with humans for the longest time. But I do, when I have used them, like the finger bones with the pearl, I once used the bowl of a human skull and gilded the inside and have a telescope looking down into it with a meteorite. So that's actually very much about a meteorite that's come from outer space and landed into the death head of a human. And maybe, hopefully, we will exit out into some incredible, beautiful space outside. So I think great respect, but I don't think there's really anything wrong with using them, But if you are, maybe you're an artist yourself, you just have to be cautious about being policed.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was incredible to see and hear about all these works. My question is in relation to, there's no doubt that your works are political, human experience and nature. But I wonder what's the influence perhaps, or what impact they may have for the dream and the imaginary. Real could be a nightmare.
Yeah.
The work, the view of the Medusas, the jellyfishes, and other ghost ship. So what does that mean for you? Not necessarily for the viewers, how we imagine what happens, but for you when you make those works. Renderati is covered by the sea. We don't see that necessarily, but what does it mean for you that that's happening?
Oh, when something is changed by a situation?
Yes, but where it's hidden, and it can be a scenario that we potentially is closer to 3D than to its reality.
I suppose you could talk about that in terms of what I presume the viewer is thinking and then what I'm thinking myself. Like when I was younger, I used dreams enormously in psychoanalytical. When I went to a shrink, as a kind of triangle between shrink, Dorothy, and work, and it was fantastic. It kind of gave me food to go into the studio with. I do that less now, but I'm quite conscious that I'm dealing with a lot of maligned, and we spoke about this earlier, animals that imbue fear. Now the cow doesn't, but if you take the teat and make it look like a penis, maybe it does. But sharks, snakes, jellyfish. Fears are very interesting territory, but I become so familiar with them that I'm so fond of them, and that familiarity kind of is it's a kind of a strange nurturing thing maybe for myself, and I hope that people get to that point when they encounter these things, or they see the jellyfish tickling her neck, or that they're not horrifying. I don't intentionally try and make something grotesque, or maybe I'm trying to make people love them.
There was one more question at the back there.
I just wanted to ask a bit about the process, I guess going back to the beginning of your talk, and whether you, and I suppose the questions about collecting, and whether you constantly gather and live with objects, or whether you sort of have an idea for a collision and have to seek them out.
That's a good question too, actually. When I was younger, I used a lot of my family stuff and I put it into work and then kind of got rid of it that way. It was almost like a de-inheritance. Then when I went to live in Connemara, I found things like the whale and the shark skin. In those days, they were selling sharks for meat. Now, thankfully, it's not done in Ireland anymore because they're so endangered. But so I searched that out. But then I found a basking shark on the beach. So it was a mixture. Then people started bringing me dead animals, and I don't want them anymore. So and then at Francesca's studio, it was about a discovery because the stuff was there. I think, so usually they pop up. It's kind of like they pop up. I don't know if you find that, even in my dumpster days, sometimes I'd be looking for some good thing, and there, poof, it'd be like a skull or whatever. I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but it would present itself. I do believe in that kind of serendipity. Yeah.
I think we should now go and enjoy a drink and a little bit of food together. But please, thank you so much for coming, and please join me in thanking Dorothy Cross.
Thank you all for coming out on a dark night, and thank you, Iwona, for pushing me delightfully.